Okay, so this is part 4, and what I want to try and do through this presentation is give you a general definition of knowledge, although it won't be the definition. So information is acquired by being told, whereas knowledge can be acquired by thinking. Okay, so that quote there tries to make a distinction between knowledge and information, so that knowledge is somewhat different than information. Okay, so what is this knowledge? There's this problem that we've seen through the first 3 parts, that knowledge is tricky to define. So some would say that knowledge is like a think concept, like it's this word that doesn't have a concrete value. Like we take a lot of words and we say those words are labels on objects, right? So chair points to an object that you can define. Cat points to an object that we can define. But knowledge, maybe like a word like love, points to a concept and not necessarily a real thing, okay? So maybe you can only understand knowledge through experience and through reflection. So eventually you can come up with a definition. But it might be good to actually have some sort of working definition, at least as a way to get going on it. So we're going to use the famous epistemological definition of knowledge, which is justified true belief. Now, I want to just stop for 1 second, just throw this up to the world's greatest source of information, the internets. And let's ask the internets, define knowledge. Okay? And we'll take the first hit, which is a dictionary website, Oxford Dictionaries. And we'll take this hit, the Wikipedia website. Okay? So Oxford Dictionaries has some definitions here: facts, information, and skills, the sum of what is known, information held on a computer system. But as well, down here, in terms of philosophy, it says that knowledge is true, justified belief. So there's that definition coming out. In terms of Wikipedia, it again has some trouble defining it. It says facts, information, descriptions, or skill. But then it starts talking about philosophy, which was originally Plato who came up with this study of epistemology that defined knowledge as justified true belief. Okay? So what I'm proposing to you guys is not my definition. It's a fairly famous epistemological definition of what knowledge is. Okay? And it's certainly disputable, because even if you go through here, and even look, there's even a citation on epistemology for the IB Theory of Knowledge course is actually listed on there. Okay? So as you scroll down, you can see that as eventually it gets in, it starts defining belief and truth and justification, but right away it'll hit a problem called the Gettier problem that has a problem with that definition. We're not going to get into that because this is not a philosophy course where I need to lay that all out down for you, but it's a good starting point. How to define knowledge as this thing called justified true belief. So knowledge equals justified true belief, or for you mathematicians, K equals JTB. I want to go all math style on this, okay? It's not the definition of knowledge, but it's the most famous definition of knowledge, and it's a good starting point. So let's take a look at the 3 elements that break it down, okay? This is Aristotle. It's the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things, just so far as the nature of the subject admits. Okay, so let's look at truth. So with truth, if you know something, you must think it's true. You must claim that it's true. You don't tend to know false things, okay? But truth itself is tricky, right? We've been working on that one, and truth isn't sort of a black and white study as well. So some would say that truth is independent of beliefs. Whether you believe it to be true or not, truth is a reality, some would say. That you could believe the world is flat, but the truth is that the world is round. So that truth is independent of necessarily whether you believe it or not, okay? If everyone believes something is true, that also does not make it true. If all of us believe there was a dragon under my desk right now, that doesn't make it true. So for example, in the Middle Ages, it was believed that there were 7 planets. And everyone said, yep, that's true. There's 7 planets. Everyone believed that. Everyone agreed on that. But in fact, they were wrong. Okay? It It was later found that there were 9 planets, and now there's 8, and there might be 9 again. So right now we have 8 planets. When I was a kid your age, there was 9 planets. Maybe when you guys have kids, there'll be 9 again. So how can we know what's ever actually true? The truth of the statement, how many planets are in our solar system, might be something that we can never really totally classify. And as well, we make mistakes. We're fallible. Okay? So this would imply that this idea of truth requires something less than absolute certainty. The ability to be absolutely certain that something's true isn't going to get us to knowledge. We can't go there. That's just too far of a stretch. Okay, so often, and this is often done in courtroom cases, truth is something that's defined as beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? So when they say something's true, it's true beyond a reasonable doubt. We're not absolutely sure, we're not totally certain, but it's true as far as a reasonable doubt is concerned. Okay? This is a pretty good definition for truth. To say, well, it's pretty much true. Could I be wrong? Sure. There's a possibility I could be wrong, but beyond reasonable doubt, I believe this to be true. The average man's opinions are much less foolish than they would be if he thought for himself. So now let's take a look at belief, because the last word I said in that previous definition was that I believed it was true. Not that it was true, but that I believed beyond a reasonable doubt that it was true. So belief has to fit into this, okay? So if you know something, like we've talked about before, you must at least believe it's true. Now, if truth is objective, belief is subjective, meaning belief is something individualistic and truth might be something objective. In other words, it might be objectively true that the world is round, but we might subjectively believe that it's flat, okay? And another would be that if you are not aware of something, then how could you say to know it? How would you know about quantum physics if you weren't aware of quantum physics? How would you know about Australia if no one ever, if you never actually experienced it or were aware of Australia? So since the time of Plato, philosophers have argued that when you know something, you're in a completely different brain state than when you merely believe it. So that you have to jump from belief to knowledge is a bit of a mental jump. That you may just believe something, but to claim that you know something, that's a different mental state. Okay. So you may want to look at this as and I like to look at this as a continuum, right? So unjustified beliefs will be on one end, and beliefs for which there is some evidence for would be in the middle, and beliefs which are beyond a reasonable doubt would be on the other end. So this would be stuff that you believe beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? And these would be beliefs over here which are totally unjustified, and there's very little, if no, evidence for it. And in the middle, you have somewhat of a belief in something, and there's somewhat of an evidence for something, okay? So here, again, you're going beyond belief to the realm of knowledge. So you can eventually start to believe something. It's like, well, I kind of believe it. Now I'm going to say I know it, right? So you're going beyond belief to knowledge. Okay, so let's look at a couple different types of belief. A vague belief, okay? You might believe that eating tomatoes will help reduce the risk of heart disease. You have no idea where that information came from. It was the classic they say that eating, who's they? But you kind of believe it. But you're ready to give that up. If all of a sudden you read an article that says, you know what, tomatoes are actually bad for your heart, you might give that up immediately. But right now you have this sort of vague belief. And some of you might have beliefs like that right now. You might just have this vague belief that this is good for me or this is bad for me. And you don't have a lot of supporting evidence behind it, but you're okay with it and you're acting on it. You're acting on that belief. Then you might have a well-supported belief, okay? You might have believed that Smith killed Jones. I believe that, right? And I might even be able to provide evidence to support my belief. But if pressed and said, are you sure that Smith killed Jones? Are you ready to convict him? You might go, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, right? Classic case in the early 90s of O.J. Simpson, and did he kill his ex-wife, right? Some people might believe that he did it, but would they be willing to necessarily convict him of it? That might be a different step that some people may not be able to reach. And then finally, you have a belief that's beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? Americans landed on the moon in 1969. Okay? You might believe that's true. You might have a lot of evidence to support that. You might even say, I believe it beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? Even though there are conspiracy theorists out there who say that, in fact, that was staged in a movie theater, a movie sound stage, that the moon landing never actually happened. They just did it with fancy camera tricks. Now, you may not, even though there's some evidence for that, you may just say, you know what, I don't believe that. Beyond a reasonable doubt, I feel that the Americans landed on the moon in 1969. And you may be somewhere along this continuum for different beliefs that you hold, is how much do you believe them? If 50 million people say a foolish thing, still a foolish thing. Okay, so then the last part, and I think in a lot of ways the most important part of this knowledge definition, is the justification part. So something can be true, something can be justified, you can believe, pardon me, that it can be true, and you can believe that you know it. But I think the justification part is the important part, okay? So you may, in fact, have a true belief that you believe in, and you may even say you know it, but there may be more needed than that, okay? So imagine someone claims to know that there are 9 planets in the solar system. You might say, well, how do you know this? How do you know there's 9 planets? He replies, well, the human body has 9 windows into the temple of the body. The eyes, the mouth, the ears, the nostrils, etc. I'm not going to go over them all. So there are these 9 windows in the human body. So there must be 9 planets, because the analogy between the solar system, the macrocosmos, and the human body, the microcosmos, fits, and therefore my belief is true. So I believe that there are 9 planets because of my analogy to the human body, and I feel it's true. It's true, there are 9 planets. But right now, you might be at the point where you'd say, whoa, 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 whoa. You need to back this up, this whole 9 windows into the body thing. You need to justify this. And that's the point where someone makes a knowledge claim, I know this, and you're saying, oh, well, that seems true. And this person clearly believes it, but now we need to go to one other step. We need to justify our beliefs, and we need to justify our truths. Okay, this is where the course will really start to focus on those ways of knowing, right? So you will often answer that question, how do you know things, in the ways that you guys did in the beginning couple weeks of the course. You'd say, well, somebody told me, I saw it, I worked it out. It's intuitive, I just feel it. Those 4 basic ways of knowing start coming in. Some of the other ways of knowing, the newer ways that the course is starting to focus on, will also come into play. But some ways of justifying your knowledge are more accepted than others. Like if you said, you know what, there was an accident just outside the school this morning. How do you know? I saw it. Or how do you know? Well, I read the mind of the driver. I used my ESP to read the mind of the driver just before the impact. And even though I didn't go outside today, I know because of my ESP. So we might be more willing to accept some ways of knowing than others. And again, this is this whole idea of justification. You might also have answered that question, how do you know there was a car accident? Well, I felt it. I felt it in the energy in the room that there was a car accident outside the building. It was in my emotional state that I determined it. So does that mean that perception is a better way of knowing than emotion? Might be. Okay. So one of the ways we start to analyze ways of knowing is through things like reliability. Okay? Perception is generally a reliable source of information. Okay? But perception is also a big concept. There's vision, there's hearing, there's smell, right? Often you walk by the cafeteria in the morning and you can sense what the special of the day might be by your sense of smell. Even though you could also read it on the, say, the board that announces the special of the day, we tend to weigh our senses as well. And telepathy might be one that we either give very little weight to or none at all, okay? So whether or not you know something might also depend on context. Okay, so I have to apologize. Mr. Corrigan is the former principal here. You claim that you know Mr. Corrigan is in his office right now. So let's go with Mr. Weiss. Mr. Weiss is in his office down the hall right now. How do you know that? Well, I saw him go in his office, and I can kind of hear his voice through the wall right now. So you're using perceptual sort of context here to justify this. Now, if someone said to you, you know what? The fate of the world depends on Mr. Weiss being in his office right now. Are you sure he's in his office? You might not be willing, excuse me, to make that claim. You might go, you know what? Well, I'm not sure if he's in his office. Even though you had that strong perception of it, okay? So again, we're not these people that make these kinds of extreme positions. We can be skeptical, absolutely. But when we make a statement like, I know something, especially if it's in a context like a court of law, or if you're called down to the principal's office and you were accused of some sort of school incident, and you say, well, I know I wasn't outside that door of the gym locker room when that iPod was stolen. I know I wasn't there. When you make that kind of a statement, an I know statement, you are stepping out beyond belief to the realm of knowledge, and you're taking responsibility for that claim, okay? You are claiming that knowledge instantly, okay? And with that claim of knowledge, there is an ethical element built into it as well, okay? That there's this sort of ethics behind a knowledge claim as well. Okay, if the world should blow itself up, the last audible voice would be that of an expert saying, it can't be done. Okay. So let's look at levels of knowledge. So, sure, we can define knowledge as justified true belief. That's the classic epistemological definition. But as well, we can have different levels of knowledge, like a superficial grasp of something, a good understanding, a mastery of that knowledge. There's different ways you could say you know something. When a 5-year-old says, my mummy is a doctor, okay, his understanding of what that means is clearly not the same as what the mother understands that to be, or what you might understand it to be now, right? A lot of what we know is what's called secondhand knowledge. You're just repeating what somebody else said, right? You don't necessarily have a deep understanding of it, right? When you were a kid, you might have said, my daddy is a blank, and you had no idea what that actually meant. That's the answer you were supposed to say. As you start to study the claims that you make, as you go in more deeply into the knowledge itself, your understanding is likely to grow and grow and grow and develop over time. That's the whole point of why you've been in school for 13 years. What you knew the word science meant in grade 2 is certainly different than what you think science means now. Okay, so let's say the theory of relativity is an example. Let's say you study it this year. By the way, have any of you studied the theory of relativity at all? Okay, or possibly this year. Now, let's say you guys 4 years from now are studying it in university. Okay, then you specialize in the theory of relativity. Let's say you get a degree in physics, and you start getting a doctorate in physics, and then you become a professor of physics. Each time your knowledge will definitely get a bit deeper and more sophisticated than it was right now at this moment, and what it was when you first heard those 3 words put together. You might be thinking of something right now that you knew once, but have since realized that you actually didn't know very much at all about that subject. You thought at the time you knew lots about it, but now you actually realize that there was way more that you needed to know about it. So knowledge definitely has levels to it. Knowledge is of 2 kinds. We know a subject ourselves, or we know where we can find information upon it. Okay. So let's make a distinction between knowledge and information. Okay, so let's say you spend an afternoon teaching a child 9 times 7 is 63. 9 times 7 is 63. 9 times 7 is 63. Then you teach them the chemical formula for water is H2O. The chemical formula for water is H2O. Then the heroine in Pride and Prejudice is called Elizabeth Bennet. And you start teaching the child these knowledge claims, these factual things. By the end of the afternoon, the child might have in fact acquired information, but have they acquired knowledge, right? Do they know what this actually is? Okay? Could you make the claim that this is in fact knowledge? Each of these statements is true, right? These are all true statements in the truest sense of the word. We could all agree, okay, those are 3 true statements. The child could believe them to be true. The child could have belief in all these because the child believes in you. And the child also feels justified. They trust you. They have justification because you are a good authority. Therefore, you meet all the criteria of these being 3 statements of knowledge that the child has acquired. They know 9 times 7 is 63. Why? Because it's a true statement, because they believe in it, and it's justified because you are an authority, and therefore they are justified in believing it. But the child doesn't know how to multiply. They know that fact. 9 times 7 is 63. You ask them, what's 9 times 7? 63. Then you say, what's 9 times 2? No idea. You say the chemical formula for water is H2O, and you ask the child, what's the chemical formula for water? H2O. What's the chemical formula for benzene? No idea. They don't necessarily, they know those things, but there's clearly something missing here. You may not be able to make the statement, the child knows this stuff. Okay? So drilling facts into someone's head does not lead to understanding. Okay? A person with a genuine knowledge of a subject does not just merely have information, but also understands how the parts relate to one another. Okay? You might think that about some of your studies you're doing now, that you're just grinding information into your brain and that you don't necessarily know it. How many people in this room, and I know it's going to be all your hands probably, have been reading a novel that you've been assigned, and you get to the end of the page and you realize your eyes were doing the reading, but your brain was totally somewhere else? How many of you, come on, I do it all the time. Especially when I'm tired. I'm reading a book, and it's like I put my eyes on autopilot. My eyes have the ability to go through every word. Meanwhile, my brain is totally doing something else. So an analogy could be that information is the bricks, and knowledge is the building, right? Bricks themselves don't give you what the knowledge is when it's accumulated together. You can't have a building without bricks. In other words, you can't have knowledge without information. But bricks alone are not a building. If you just put a big pile of bricks or a big pile of information, that doesn't give you knowledge. So again, that definition, justified true belief, is not sufficient in a lot of ways to actually laying out what knowledge is. It's a good starting spot. It's a good way to kind of nail down some of the components, but it's clearly got to go beyond just that. Okay, so when you study a subject, you learn a bunch of facts, you learn a bunch of information. But in accumulating all that information, hopefully you're starting to make sense of those facts. History is a good example of that. You could just read a list of dates and what event is associated with those dates. But that doesn't really tell you much about what's going on in the context of those dates. So sometimes you actually acquire information by reflecting on the information. You go, okay, well, I've got all this information. I should think about what this all means, right? Sometimes by accumulating a whole bunch of information, that reflection comes out from you. I mean, how many of us have crammed a bunch of information the night before an exam, but had no idea? I always like the analogy of that night cram is like you taking a big glass pitcher of water on your head, and you filled it up with all this knowledge, and as you walk into the exam, you're like, oh God, don't spill, don't forget. Then you get to the exam, and you're like, blah, and you dump it all on the paper, hoping you'll get a good mark on the exam, okay? Have you ever done that? Have you ever crammed for an exam and passed it by just jamming your brain full of knowledge the night before? And then at the end of it, a week later, when they ask you, well, what do you know about that exam? I know nothing. I don't know anything. I just had all that information, I memorized it, and now it's out. Now it's gone. So that may not be knowledge then at that point. That was just information. Okay. Now, I want to wrap today with another little, I want to again challenge you guys. Just stop this first.